to episode 4 of the Blindside Rugby Podcast with me, Chris Hattingh. I thank you very much for joining me on this latest edition of the podcast. It was a thrilling weekend of semi-finals action in Super Rugby, and we'll go through all those results. And there's a lot of news regarding coaches and players also coming out now. Also some local rugby that we can talk about here in South Africa. So let's get straight into it. Probably the biggest news in terms of coaching, and this is for New Zealand, for the New Zealand teams. Warren Gatland, the current Welsh coach, is also going to bring the British and Irish Lions to South Africa in 2021. He has been revealed as the new coach for the Chiefs, the Super Rugby team based out of Waikato, that's in Hamilton. Very interesting news. Obviously, Dave Rennie recently announced his departure from the Chiefs, so we were wondering who's going to come in. And Warren Gatland is obviously a very impressive person to get in, all his experience. He will coach the Chiefs after he's taken Wales to the World Cup. Obviously, he'll hope that the Welsh team will perform very well, and then he'll get time off from coaching the Chiefs for the next Lions tour. I'm sure many of you remember James O'Connor, an Australian rugby player. Well, he's been playing for the Sale Sharks. They've released him to allow him to return to his home country and resurrect his Test career with the Wallabies. That's very interesting news to me. He was sort of in the rugby wilderness. Internationally speaking, a lot of issues in the past, a ridiculously talented player, and now maybe he has a chance to put himself back into contention for the Wallabies. He was into his final year of his 3-year contract with the Premiership side, but Director of Rugby Steve Diamond released him to join the Vodacom Super Rugby side, and that side, while it hasn't been revealed exactly, we're not sure which Australian team he'll join. It appears that he will probably join the Reds to play for them in next year's Super Rugby campaign. So I don't think he'll be in contention to be selected for the World Cup this year, but maybe after that. He's still 28, obviously, so he could have some time on his side. In South African news, the Southern Kings, their majority stake shareholders, the greatest rugby company in the whole wide world, that's what the shareholders are called, they've called for the removal of Bantwini Matika from the board following his statements about Nick Mallett. I'm sure many of you know who Nick Mallett is. Matika took to social media after it was confirmed that Mallett would assist the Kings in their search for a new head coach following the departure of Dion Davids. In the Facebook post, which has since been removed, Matika accused Mallett of racism and said he was anti-transformation. In response to the post, Kings chairman Loyiso Dotwana released a statement calling for Matika, who also serves as the deputy president of the Eastern Province Rugby Union, to be removed from the board. So again, issues in South African rugby at a local level that hinders proper, transformation and changes which could benefit all of South African rugby and the Springboks especially. There's always seems to be some ego thing or something going on in the background. So that shouldn't surprise us, especially in the Eastern Cape, which is the heartland and the heartbeat of black rugby in South Africa. It's unfortunately undermined constantly by people's egos getting in the way, which doesn't serve the greater good of rugby in the Eastern Cape and in South Africa more widely. But hopefully this sort of matter will be resolved. I don't know, we'll see. You would think that you would want to get in someone with the expertise of Nick Mallett. They could put in stuff with his contract about stuff that they would distance themselves from if he said it in public kind of thing, if you're worried about him, being anti-transformation, that sort of thing. But I think this isn't the right way to resolve these things. It should be much more above board. And this will have an effect right the way down through the union, might discourage new players from coming in the future. So, again, I guess shooting themselves in the foot there in the Eastern Cape, unfortunately. Sticking with South Africa, the Sharks on Friday announced that Sean Everett will be their head coach in the 2019 Currie Cup. He is replacing Robert du Preez, who coached the team during last year's victorious Currie Cup campaign when the team obviously played really well. There's been no news regarding du Preez's Super Rugby coaching future at this stage. There have been field issues in the news throughout the Super Rugby season, which I think have affected the team. There's sort of allegations and rumors of Robert du Preez, how he uses his influence to make sure his sons get picked for the team. That sort of nepotism kind of thing. I guess this is in vein with the Kings story. These things going on in the background in South African rugby, which act to the detriment of the teams on the field and their performance. So yeah, we'll see. Let's see what happens going forward with the Sharks. Moving back to New Zealand, All Blacks wing Rico Ioane has said he would love to join teammate Sonny Bill Williams in pulling on the Ponsonby club colours this weekend as a sort of match sharpener ahead of the Rugby Championship. Ione obviously plays for the Blues, and they weren't in the playoffs this season, so he hasn't played for a few weeks now, and it's nice to see these sort of big star All Blacks playing for the local teams. I think it could help with some match sharpness. Obviously, it's not the same level as Super Rugby or Test level, but it's always good to sort of have a hit out, to put it that way. And then finally, on Brad Weber, who plays for the Chiefs, he was included in the All Blacks first squad announced of the year. We'll talk about that in more detail further on in the podcast. But it was interesting. I read, this article about him and his inclusion. He says he never heard anything from the All Blacks coaches throughout this year of Super Rugby with the Chiefs. And for him, that silence proved to be golden. He didn't feel distracted by anything. He just thought he would focus on week by week, game by game, and deliver his best rugby. And that has clearly proven good for him because he's been included in the squad along with TJ Perenara and Aaron Smith. So I think it says a lot about him. It's also interesting that this is his first All Blacks recall at the age of 28. This is now 4 years since his one and only test, which was also before the last World Cup in 2015. It's been 2 years since he broke his femur, and he obviously wondered if he'd ever reach these heights of rugby again to play for the All Blacks. And it's a testament to his work ethic, I think, that he is now back to where he probably feels he belongs. Okay, that's all the news stuff covered. Let's just move on to results now. In Super Rugby, we had the semi-finals this past weekend. I hope all of you managed to watch both semi-finals. In the first game, the Jaguares hosted the Brumbies. They beat them by 39 points to 7. For that game, I picked the Jaguares to win by 7. So clearly, I got that one way wrong. I thought the Brumbies would be way more competitive. But the Jaguares, with their home crowd of about 31,000 people, they didn't give the Brumbies any chance to settle into the game, use their good line speed, that sort of thing. They were absolutely clinical with their opportunities. I think they led by about 20 points in the first 20 minutes, so a point per minute, which is crazy and very difficult for a team to come back from, and the Brumbies simply didn't have it in them. It's probably another indication of the state of Australian rugby. They can't mount these sorts of comebacks, which some South African and New Zealand teams might manage. The Jaguares, I think, a testament to the work they've been doing the past few years, the influence of Graham Henry, the former New Zealand, the All Blacks coach. They've been trying to put the right structures in place, trying to reform their game plan, this sort of thing. I also thought they were very good discipline-wise. That's always been an issue for the Jaguares and the Argentinian national team. They always seem to shoot themselves in the foot by being ill-disciplined, but they've sort of ironed out those parts of their game. So a really, really well-deserved win. It's going to be a great final, I think, between them and the Crusaders. And then moving on to the Crusaders, in the second semi-final, they beat the Hurricanes in a New Zealand derby by 30 points to 26. I picked the Crusaders there to win by 7, so a much closer one there. I thought this was a really fantastic game, a lot of back and forth, a bit more open than the first semi-final. The Crusaders were simply more structured and efficient. They took their chances better. The Hurricanes made a few errors which gifted the Crusaders a few points and tries, and you can't make these sorts of mistakes at this level, especially not against a team like the Crusaders. And then at the end, there was a bit of controversy, I thought, when Sam Whitelock, the Crusaders captain, was the stand-in captain when Kieran Reid isn't available. He forced a knock-on in a ruck from TJ Perenara, and you can sort of see he comes in from the side, and he reaches through the ruck. He doesn't come through the gate as one should, so he's in an illegal action. But it was so fast. Maybe the referee was right there, would have seen it in all its detail, but the speed of action was so fast, the referee didn't obviously think Whitelock had interfered, and then Perenara knocked the ball on. And this is the sort of charge which was always leveled against Richie McCaw, that he pushed the line of the law, the letter of the law, and always played on the edge. And I suppose at that level, it says something about these players that they know when to do this sort of thing and when not. So it's a good indicator of his ability to judge the moment and what is and isn't acceptable. So just a little bit of controversy there at the end, but as I said, the Crusaders just pipping the Hurricanes by 30 points to 26. My player of the week this week was Richie Mo'unga, the fly half for the Crusaders. It was sort of a battle of the All Black fly halves between him and Beauden Barrett from the Hurricanes. I thought this match might give us a better indication of who might start for the All Blacks. And even though in this game again, I think Mo'unga just edged Beauden Barrett. I think Steve Hansen, the All Blacks coach, will probably still go with Beauden Barrett in the World Cup for the All Blacks as his starting fly half. But Mo'unga He was very calm, kicked well again, controlled the game. He's really, really maturing a lot as a fly half. And it helps, obviously, when you have a forward pack as good and efficient as the Crusaders have. It gives the fly half a lot more time to do his thing and to assess each situation on its own merits. For Mwanga, a nice little stat, he equaled Daniel Carter's record of 23 points in a Super Rugby playoff game. He scored 2 tries, 5 conversions, and 1 penalty. And really good all-round performance. And I think, really, really good to see his trajectory move going into the World Cup. If something happens to Bowden Barrett, then they have a very, very capable backup in Richie Mwanga. Now, my predictions for the final on Saturday, the 6th of July, so this coming Saturday, at 9:35 a.m. South African time. We've got the Crusaders hosting the Jaguares. It is the Crusaders' third final, in a row. Hopefully, from my perspective, their third finals victory in a row. For the Crusaders, Ryan Crotty and Scott Barrett have been ruled out of the game. I'm more concerned about Crotty missing. I think he's very underrated. He brings a certain calm to the midfield of the Crusaders and the All Blacks, and I'm hoping they can fill that void in some way. But I think they'll get by-in. They have the sort of mentality of it's not about who puts on the jersey, but about fulfilling your role and just stepping up and filling that gap. So maybe they won't miss those 2 players too much. For Captain Kieran Reid, I'm assuming he, knowing these players and what you read about them, they try not to get too far ahead in their thinking, but he'll be playing, in his third final in a row, and I'm sure he was never dreaming of this sort of fairy tale finish. For him, Owen Franks, Ryan Crotty, Jordan Tafua, other long-serving Crusaders, they'll all have a chance to sign off their Crusaders' careers by winning their 3rd consecutive Super Rugby title. It'll also be Captain Sam Whitelock's last match for the Crusaders until 2021. And flanker Matt Todd, he is also unlikely to return. So at least Sam Whitelock will be back, but the others will be done after this. And you also have to think about assistant coaches Brad Moore and Ronan O'Gara. They're off to Europe when the season is over. So a lot of change coming at the Crusaders. And I think they'll use that sort of emotion to hype themselves up to make sure that they front up and perform in the final. On the Jaguares side, I read an interesting story about Gonzalo Kucera. He's the coach of the Jaguares. Unlike other leaders, managers of Super Rugby teams, he sits alone in the coach's box. It seems like he thinks alone. He celebrates his team's tries alone. It seems like he really likes the quiet space in order to see the game more clearly, which is the thing, I guess, with Argentina and the Spanish influence there. We always assume that they're all very passionate and loud and emotional, but he seems to go a bit in the other direction, at least in certain contexts. There's not usually anyone in the box next to him screaming into his ear, no one looking anxious, no one punching the air. And it's interesting to contrast and compare him with the Crusaders coach, Scott Robertson. Robertson, I think he also tries to find some quiet time before matches, but he's much more inclusive. He always has his group of coaches around him. It seems that they live together. They live the game together. They eat, breathe, and sleep rugby together. They celebrate together. They cry together. So interesting 2 approaches. We'll see which one, works better in the final. But it's always nice to look at how different coaches approach different things. From the Jaguares side, just in terms of tactics, they know how to move the ball very well. Their game has certainly been influenced, as I mentioned earlier, by Graham Henry, but they're no longer sort of a slave to it, if I can put it that way. They frequently move the ball wide and bring up the wing, and then they chip in behind. Against the Brumbies, they had 52% possession, but 68% territory. So that shows you that their kicking game is excellent. They know where the territory is, where they should play, not to put pressure onto themselves. I think a real area of weakness for them is the scrum, which is, for any of you who have watched rugby for a while, that's a big irony for an Argentinian team and nation. They've always built their reputation around the scrum, that facet of the game. Interesting. The 2 Jaguares props who started against the Brumbies were 21 and 23 or 3 years old. Their inexperience was exposed. So I'm sure the Crusaders are going to try and nail them in scrum time, maybe get some penalties, that kind of thing, and use that to put pressure on them. But for the final, I'm picking the Crusaders. Of course, I'm going with my heart, not with and with my head. I think they're just more settled, more experienced, and the Jaguares obviously now have to fly all the way to New Zealand for the final. I'll pick the Crusaders to win by 10 points and get their 3rd Super Rugby title in a row. Moving to local rugby in South Africa, the Craven Week kicked off this week. I think for those of you who are interested in the future of South African rugby, you should definitely try and watch as many games as you can. There's lots of games every single day, so I won't try and run through all the results on each week's episode. There's too much, I think, minutiae and details to cover there, but try and watch some games, especially from your local unions. So if you're in Pretoria or Gauteng, try and watch the Bulls and the Lions games, and then you'll be able to tell which new young players will be coming into those teams in the next few years. And then for our weekly All Blacks Spotlight, if this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, I am an All Blacks fan living in South Africa. Surprise, surprise. So I'm going to try and always put some sort of spotlight on the All Blacks and All Blacks news. And really, really big news this week, the last few days. First, they revealed their jersey for the World Cup, which I'm, a big fan of. I think it looks really classy, very clean. So I'll try and get that as soon as I can, try and buy a jersey. But also, and probably way more importantly, they revealed a list of 39 names ahead of the Rugby Championship. Now the squad has to be cut down to 31 players. That's the limit of players permitted to travel to Japan. So they're obviously going to use this big list of 39 players, use the players in the Rugby Championship to whittle down to the 31 that they want to go to the World Cup. Some of the surprise inclusions and winners, I guess let's call them winners, not surprise inclusions. Sonny Bill Williams, I'm very surprised that he made it in. He's had injuries in the past few years. I don't think he's been playing very well. So I'm surprised that they're taking him. I think they could have taken one of the younger players, maybe Ma Nonu, if they wanted to go with an old head. But that was a very surprising inclusion to me. Luke Jacobson, he plays for the Chiefs, a loose forward. He's been included. Braden Enor and Sevu Reese from the Crusaders. They've had fantastic seasons, so glad to see that they're being rewarded. Then Josh Ioane from the Highlanders, he's also in there. I think he'll be sort of an understudy to Bowden Barrett and Richie Mo'unga. He probably won't get a lot of game time, but he'll be there sort of learning the ropes. Then Brad Weber, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, it's his comeback. So great to see him being rewarded. And then Atu Moli and Asafo Amua, both new names in the squad. Then I think some of the unlucky players to miss out, definitely Luke Whitelock, Waisake Naholo, Ma Nonu, who's also been really good this year for the Blues. David Havili from the Crusaders, he misses out. Then Nathan Harris, and lastly from the Blues, Akira Ioane. But it goes to show you when your team isn't playing very well, it might be, less probable that you'll also get picked. So unfortunately for those players, their Super Rugby teams also didn't do well this season. So that might be part of why they're missing out. But exciting news, we're getting closer and closer to the World Cup. Obviously nice to see these names come out, and now we can start formulating thoughts on starting teams who might be picked at fly half, scrum half, etc., etc. I'll also run through, that sort of list when the Springboks and the Wallabies and maybe England and France, Ireland especially, when they reveal their teams, it'll be nice to see who's in, who's out, and what we can assess, going into the World Cup. But on that note, I'm going to end off. Please try and watch the Super Rugby final this weekend. As I mentioned, it's on Saturday at 9:30 South African time. I will definitely be in front of the TV watching the Crusaders against the Jaguars. It should be really good. I think it's been a good season for Super Rugby overall. More upsets and more unsureness. I'm sure one of you can correct me or help me with that. Uncertainty, there we go. That's the correct word. More uncertainty in Super Rugby this season. Some very surprising results, and that bodes well, I think, for the competition. I think from next season, or either next season or the following season, it's going to be cut down the number of teams. So that should help the competitive level as well. And then maybe from next season, the South African teams, and especially the Australian teams, can perform a bit better, because the Australian teams were woeful again this season, even though the Brumbies reached the semi-final. I don't think any of us really expected them, if they made the final, to to challenge either the Crusaders or the Hurricanes. Yeah, thank you, listeners, for once again joining me. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please follow me on Twitter. My tag is at ChrisHatt11. Please follow Podmedia at Podmedia SA. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to it. You can find it everywhere good podcasts are found. Please share it on your social media with your friends. I hope you have a good week ahead, and I'll talk to you again next week. Thanks. Cheers.